The knock came 3 days after my son's wife delivered her ultimatum. 3 sharp raps that echoed through my empty house like gunshots. I wasn't expecting anyone. Sarah had made it clear. No visits until I cleaned up that embarrassing mess she called my yard. 68 years on this earth, and now I needed permission to see my own grandchildren. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I've been alone in this house for 5 years now, since Martha passed. Cancer took her quick, but not quick enough to spare her the suffering. We had 43 years together. Raised our boy William in this same house with the crooked mailbox and the maple tree that turns fire red every October. I never was much for gardening. That was Martha's domain. She'd spend spring mornings out there, humming to herself, hands deep in soil that seemed to respond to her touch like it knew her. After she died, I let things go. Not just the yard, though, that's what Sarah complains about. The weeds took over Martha's flower beds. The grass grew tall, then patchy. The maple still turns red, but nobody rakes the leaves anymore. I know it looks bad. I just can't find the energy to care. William visits when he can, which isn't often. His accounting firm in the city keeps him busy. He calls every Sunday night at exactly 7:30, right after they finish dinner. Our conversations follow the same pattern. How am I doing? How's the house holding up? Have I seen the doctor lately? He never stays on longer than 15 minutes. Always has papers to review before Monday. Sarah used to come by with the kids, Ellie who's 6 and Michael who just turned 4. Beautiful children, they have their grandmother's eyes. But the visits became less frequent, then stopped altogether about 2 months ago. That's when Sarah informed me that my living conditions weren't appropriate for children. If you want to visit, you'll clean the yard, she'd said over the phone, her voice carrying that edge it always had when speaking to me. It's embarrassing, Frank. The neighbors have complained. It brings down property values. William agrees with me. I doubt William actually cared about the yard. He grew up playing in dirt, built forts in that maple tree, caught fireflies in jars on summer evenings while Martha and I watched from the porch swing. But William learned long ago that agreeing with Sarah was easier than standing up to her. I was a factory man my whole life. 42 years at Carlson Manufacturing, making engine parts for cars most people couldn't afford. Started on the line when I was 18, fresh out of high school. Worked my way up to shift supervisor. Never missed a day, even when Martha begged me to call in sick during blizzards. The men count on me, I tell her, pulling on my boots before dawn. The factory closed 10 years ago. Shipped all the jobs to Mexico. They gave us each a gold watch and a handshake. Mine sits in a drawer somewhere unwound. Time moves differently when you're not punching a clock. I remember the day William was born. November 12th, 1984. Coldest damn day of the year. The hospital was 20 miles away, and our old Chevy barely made it through the snow. Martha's water broke at dinner. By midnight I was holding my son. 7 pounds 3 ounces of scrunched up face and angry cries. Most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I worked double shifts for years so Martha could stay home with him. We wanted more kids, but it never happened. Maybe that's why we spoiled him. Private school when the public ones started going downhill. College without student loans. The down payment on his first house. We wanted him to have it better than we did. Sometimes I wonder if we did too much. William never had to fight for anything. Never faced real hardship. When he met Sarah in his senior year of college, he brought her home at Thanksgiving. Martha took to her right away, said she had good bones. I wasn't so sure. There was something calculating in her smile, the way her eyes measured our modest home, our simple lives. They married the following June, outdoor ceremony at her parents' country club. Martha and I felt out of place among the golf shirts and tennis bracelets. William looked happy, though, so we smiled and wrote checks we couldn't afford. The knocking came again, louder this time. 3 more raps, insistent. I hauled myself out of my recliner, joints protesting. The TV droned on behind me, some game show where people jumped around for money. I wasn't really watching anyway. Coming, I called, my voice rough from disuse. I rarely spoke out loud anymore, except to thank the delivery kid who brought my groceries once a week. I wasn't expecting the face on the other side of that door. Hadn't seen it in nearly 30 years. "Hello, Frank," said James Miller, my former best friend. His hair had gone white, face lined with age, but those eyes were the same, sharp, knowing. "It's been a while." I stood frozen, one hand still on the doorknob. The past rushed back like a freight train. James and me as teenagers. stealing cigarettes behind the school gym. Double dating to prom, being best man at each other's weddings. Then the argument that ended it all. Something so stupid neither of us could remember the details. Just the hurt. "James," I managed finally. "What are you doing here?" He smiled a bit sadly. "Your son called me. Said you might need some help." William had called James. They hadn't spoken since William was a child. How had he even found him? "Help with what?" I asked, suspicion creeping into my voice. James gestured toward the overgrown yard. "With that, for starters. But mostly I think he's worried about you being alone." I nearly closed the door right then. Didn't need charity. Didn't need pity. Especially not from a man who'd walked away from our friendship without looking back. "I'm fine," I said stiffly. "Don't need help." James nodded, not arguing. "Can I come in anyway?" "Drove 4 hours to get here. Could use a glass of water." 4 hours. From Pittsburgh, where he'd moved after the falling out. I hesitated, then stepped back. Some habits die hard, and hospitality was one Martha had drilled into me. My living room was cluttered but clean. I wasn't a total slob. Dishes got washed. Laundry got done. I just didn't see the point in more than that. What was I keeping things nice for? Who was there to impress? James sat on the couch, looking around at the familiar space. His gaze lingered on the wall of photos. Martha and me on our wedding day. William graduating high school, the grandkids as babies. Life documented in freeze frames. "How have you been, Frank?" "Really?" I shrugged, handing him a glass of tap water. "Getting by. William says you don't leave the house much anymore." My anger flared. "William should mind his own business." James took a slow sip. "He's worried about you. Says you've been refusing to see doctors. Pushing everyone away." "That what he says?" I snorted. "Convenient version. Truth is, his wife doesn't want the kids seeing their grandfather, unless he keeps up appearances. God forbid the neighbors think they're related to someone who doesn't mow his lawn on schedule." James set down his glass. "That's not how William tells it. William doesn't see what's right in front of him. Never has." I felt the familiar bitterness rising. "Sarah's been pulling the strings since day one. Now she's using my grandkids as leverage to make me fall in line. And you're too stubborn to just clean up the yard." James raised an eyebrow. The gesture was so familiar, so reminiscent of our friendship, it caught me off guard. "It's not about the yard," I said quietly. "It's about being told what to do in my own home." "Martha's home." James nodded slowly. "I understand pride, Frank. But is it worth not seeing those kids?" The question hit harder than I expected. Ellie and Michael were the only bright spots left. Ellie with her questions about everything. Michael with his toy cars lined up precisely on my coffee table. I missed them with an ache that surprised me. "Why'd William call you?" I asked, changing the subject. "After all these years?" James looked down at his hands, weathered like mine from decades of work. "He found me on Facebook, if you can believe it. Said he remembered how close we used to be. Thought maybe I could get through to you when family couldn't. A memory surfaced. William at 7, sitting between James and me at a baseball game, wearing a too big cap and shouting himself hoarse for the home team. Before the argument, before everything changed, you were like a second father to him," I admitted reluctantly. "You were the only father that mattered," James countered. "Still are." We sat in silence for a moment, 30 years of unspoken words hanging between us. "Martha would hate seeing the yard like this," James finally said. "She loved those gardens. The truth of it stung." Martha had poured her heart into those flower beds, planning each season's blooms so something was always showing color. After the funeral, I'd let them die one by one, unable to face tending what she'd loved so much. "I don't have her touch," I said, voice rough. "Nothing grows right for me." James smiled slightly. "I remember you couldn't keep a cactus alive in college, but that's not the point, is it?" "What is the point, then?" I challenged. "The point is you're still here. Your son's still here. Those grandkids need their grandfather." James leaned forward. "And maybe cleaning up that yard isn't about making Sarah happy. Maybe it's about honoring what Martha built here." I felt something shift inside me, a small reluctant acknowledgement that he might be right. "I've got a truck full of gardening supplies outside," James continued, "and 2 strong backs between us, though mine's seen better days. What do you say we start tomorrow morning? Get this place looking like Martha would want?" I wanted to refuse, to tell him I didn't need his help or his advice, but the thought of Ellie's face when she saw her grandmother's gardens blooming again stopped me. "Why would you do this?" I asked instead. After everything? James sighed. Because we wasted 30 years over an argument neither of us remembers. Because Martha would kick my ass in the afterlife if I didn't try. And because friends help each other, even when they're being stubborn old fools. I almost smiled at that, almost. One condition, I said firmly. We don't talk about the past. What's done is done. James nodded, extending his hand. Deal. I took it after only a moment's hesitation. His grip was still firm, familiar despite the decades between us. That night, after James left with a promise to return at dawn, I stood on my porch looking at the disaster Martha's beloved yard had become. Weeds choking the beds where her roses once bloomed. Grass growing in patchy clumps. The stone pathway she'd laid by hand now barely visible under debris. For the first time in years, I felt ashamed. Not because of what Sarah or the neighbors thought, but because I'd let Martha's work die. I'd been so caught up in my grief, in my loneliness, that I'd neglected the one thing she'd asked me to care for. Just water the roses once a week, she'd said from her hospital bed, thin fingers clutching mine. That's all they need. They'll do the rest themselves. I hadn't watered anything in 5 years. Morning came earlier than I'd slept in months. I was already on my second cup of coffee when James's truck pulled into the driveway at 6:30. He wasn't alone. A young man sat in the passenger seat, lanky and familiar. My grandson, Michael's brother from Sarah's first marriage, Thomas. 19 now, home from his first year at college. I hadn't seen him in over a year. Hope you don't mind, James called as they approached the porch. Found this kid looking for work. Says he knows you. Thomas looked uncomfortable, hands shoved in his pockets. Hi, Grandpa Frank. Thomas, I nodded, surprised. Does your mother know you're here? He shrugged. Mom doesn't control everything, despite what she thinks. There was an edge to his voice I recognized. Teenage rebellion mixed with genuine frustration. I'd heard it in William's voice at that age, too, though he'd outgrown it faster than I would have liked. Well, I said, unsure what else to offer. There's coffee inside. The day passed in a blur of physical labor. We started with clearing debris, fallen branches, dead plants, years of accumulated leaves. James had brought industrial trash bags, gloves, and tools I'd never seen before. Thomas worked silently at first, then gradually began asking questions. About the yard. About Martha. About what things had been like before. By noon we could see the bones of what had once been there. The stone pathway. The raised beds. The trellis where Martha's clematis had climbed, now bare and weathered. There used to be a bird bath, I said, pointing to a spot near the maple. And a bench under that tree. James wiped sweat from his brow. I remember Martha sitting there, watching William play baseball with the neighborhood kids. The memory was so clear I could almost see her there, book in her lap, looking up to cheer when William made a good hit. Thomas straightened from where he'd been pulling weeds. Dad says you taught him to throw a curveball in this yard. Did he? I was surprised William remembered. Took him all summer to get it right. Your grandmother thought I was too hard on him. Were you? Thomas asked. I considered the question. Probably. My father wasn't one for patience. I tried to be different with William, but I trailed off. Not sure how to finish, but some patterns are hard to break. James finished for me. We worked through the afternoon, stopping only when our old bodies demanded rest. Thomas kept going, his youth giving him energy we envied. By evening, the yard was cleared but still barren. No flowers, no color. We'll need to get plants, James said as we sat on the porch steps, drinking lemonade Thomas had found the mix for in my pantry. Seeds won't bloom fast enough. I nodded, looking at the empty beds. Martha kept a garden journal. Might still be in her desk. That night after they left, I found myself opening Martha's desk drawer for the first time since her death. Her things remained exactly as she'd left them. Pens lined up neatly, notepads stacked by size, a small dish containing paper clips and rubber bands. And there, beneath it all, a worn leather journal with garden dreams embossed on the cover. Inside were years of careful notes. Which plants thrived in which locations. Bloom times carefully recorded. Sketches of garden layouts, color schemes for different seasons. Martha's handwriting, neat and precise, filled every page. I ran my fingers over the ink, remembering her bent over this book at our kitchen table, planning next year's garden while snow fell outside. The pain of missing her hit fresh, as if she'd just left yesterday instead of 5 years ago. On the final page, dated just weeks before her diagnosis, she'd written, "For Frank, When I'm gone, the roses will need extra care. They're stubborn like you, but worth the effort. I closed the book, throat tight with unshed tears. The next day, armed with Martha's journal and James's truck, we visited 3 different nurseries. I spent money I hadn't planned to spend, buying exactly what Martha's notes called for. Roses, of course. Hydrangeas for the shady corner. Lavender along the path. Petunias for quick color, while the perennials established themselves. Thomas came again, bringing with him a friend, a girl named Amber, with bright green hair and more energy than both James and me combined. She knew plants too, asked smart questions about soil and sunlight that I couldn't answer but found in Martha's notes. By the week's end, the yard had transformed. Not to its former glory, that would take time, but to something alive again, something with potential. On Sunday, William called at his usual time. I told him about the yard, about James and Thomas and the girl with green hair. There was a long pause before he spoke. "Dad," he said finally, "I didn't call James." The words didn't register at first. "What?" "I didn't call James," William repeated. "I haven't spoken to him since I was a kid." But he said. I trailed off, confused. "He drove from Pittsburgh. Said you found him on Facebook." Another pause. "Dad, James Miller moved back to town 5 years ago. Right after Mom died. He lives about 20 minutes from you." The revelation hit like a physical blow. James had lied. But why? "I need to go," I told William abruptly. "Dad, wait." But I'd already hung up, something I'd never done before. My mind was racing. If William hadn't called James, why had he shown up at my door? How had he known about Sarah's ultimatum? About the yard? The knock came as I was still processing. 3 sharp raps, just like before. I opened the door to find James standing there, holding a small potted rose bush. "Thought we could put this one near the porch," he said, then paused, seeing my expression. "What's wrong?" "William didn't call you," I said flatly. James's smile faded. He set the rose bush down carefully on the step. "No, he didn't. You lied to me." "I did. Why?" He looked past me, toward the yard we'd spent a week restoring. "Because I drove by this house every week for 5 years, watching it fall apart like you were. Because Martha made me promise before she died that I'd look out for you when she couldn't. And because I was too damn proud to just knock on your door and say I was sorry." I stared at him, speechless. "Martha called me in the hospital," James continued. "Said life was too short for 30-year grudges. Made me promise we'd make things right." He smiled sadly. "I told her we would, but then she was gone and you were so broken. It never seemed like the right time. So why now?" I managed to ask. "Because Sarah came to see me last month. Said she was worried about you, that you were shutting everyone out, refusing to take care of yourself or your home. She thought maybe I could help since we'd been friends once." "Sarah came to you?" The idea seemed impossible. Sarah, who looked down her nose at everyone. Sarah, who measured worth by income and appearances. James nodded. "She loves those kids, Frank. Wants them to know their grandfather. But she was afraid the state of things here," he gestured vaguely, "might scare them. Or worse, that you'd given up. So the ultimatum was what, a bluff?" "A desperate attempt to motivate you," James corrected. She didn't know what else to do. I sank down onto the porch step, suddenly exhausted. Everything I thought I knew was shifting. "There's more," James said, sitting beside me. "Thomas has been worried too. Been asking William about you for months. The green-haired girl? She's studying horticulture, wants to restore historic gardens. Thomas asked her to help because he knew how much the yard meant to his grandmother." The pieces were falling into place, but differently than I'd imagined. Not a conspiracy to control me, but a family trying in their clumsy way to pull me back from the brink I'd been walking for 5 years. "Why didn't they just tell me?" I asked. James laughed softly. "Have you met yourself, Frank? You're the most stubborn man I know. Would you have accepted their help if they'd offered it directly?" I knew the answer was no. Pride had always been my downfall. "So where does this leave us?" I asked after a long silence. James picked up the rose bush, examining its small buds. "That depends on you. The yard's mostly done. You could thank us and send us on our way, or you could invite your family to Sunday dinner, show them what we've accomplished. Let those grandkids run around in a yard their grandmother would be proud of." The thought made something warm spread through my chest, something I hadn't felt in years. "Hope, maybe. Martha's roses are blooming," I said quietly. James nodded. "They just needed a little care. Like someone else I know." We sat together on the porch steps, two old men with decades of history between us, watching the evening light gild the newly planted garden. In the gentle breeze, Martha's roses swayed slightly as if nodding their approval. Later that night I did something I hadn't done in months. I called William, instead of waiting for his Sunday call. "Dad?" His voice was concerned, confused by the break in routine. "I'd like you to bring the family for dinner next Sunday," I said without preamble. "The yard's looking better, still needs work, but I think Martha would approve." There was a moment of stunned silence, then, "We'll be there. All of us." As I hung up, I felt something shift inside me. Not healing exactly. The hole left by Martha would never fully close, but perhaps a turning towards something new, a recognition that life, like gardens, required tending to grow. That night, I dreamed of Martha sitting on her bench under the maple tree, smiling as she watched our family play in the yard she'd loved so much. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of early autumn day Martha had loved best. I woke before my alarm, nerves keeping me from sleeping past dawn. The family was coming, all of them. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, noting the changes 5 years had carved into my face. Deeper lines around the eyes, white hair where there used to be salt and pepper. I looked older but somehow less beaten down than the last time I'd really studied my reflection. "You clean up okay for an old-timer," I told my reflection, straightening the collar on my best flannel shirt. James arrived early carrying 2 pies from the bakery downtown. "Thought we might need backup dessert," he said, setting them on the counter, "in case conversation stalls." "You think pie fixes everything?" I asked, but I was smiling. Martha always said it couldn't hurt. He glanced around my kitchen. "Need help with anything?" I gestured to the roast in the oven. "Got most of it under control. Just nervous, I guess." "They're family, Frank. Not the Spanish Inquisition." "Family can be worse," I said, remembering Sarah's coldness, William's silent agreement. James nodded, understanding without needing details. "Well, that's why I'm here, back up." I was grateful, though I didn't say it out loud. They arrived at exactly noon, William's punctuality showing itself even now. I watched through the window as they parked. Sarah emerged first, smoothing her dress, checking her appearance in the car window. William helped Ellie from her car seat, while Michael bounced impatiently on the sidewalk. Thomas and the green-haired girl, Amber, pulled up behind them in a battered Honda. The doorbell rang and my heart hammered against my ribs. "It's just Sunday dinner," I muttered to myself, wiping suddenly damp palms on my pants before opening the door. Ellie launched herself at my legs before anyone could speak. "Grandpa, your yard is so pretty now." I bent down to hug her, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood. "Hello, sweetheart, I've missed you." Michael was next, more reserved but still eager for a hug. William stepped forward with an awkward smile, and we shared a brief, stiff embrace that said more about our relationship than words could. Sarah stood on the threshold, uncertain. Her gaze moved past me to the living room, noting the cleaned surfaces, the absence of clutter. Looking for something to criticize, perhaps. "Hello, Sarah," I said, not moving to hug her. We'd never had that kind of relationship. "Frank?" she nodded. "The yard looks nice." It was as close to approval as I'd ever heard from her. I stepped back, allowing them into my home for the first time in months. James played the perfect host, offering drinks, complimenting Sarah's dress, asking William about work. I busied myself in the kitchen, grateful for the distraction. Through the doorway I could see Thomas introducing Amber to William. My grandson looked happier than I'd seen him in years. Dinner went smoothly at first. The food was good. Martha's recipes still worked their magic. Conversation stayed light. Ellie's school project, Michael's T-ball team, William's new account at work. No one mentioned the months of silence between us. No one referenced Sarah's ultimatum. It wasn't until dessert that the cracks began to show. "So," Sarah said, setting down her fork precisely beside her half-eaten pie, "James tells me you two have reconnected." Her tone carried something I couldn't quite place. Suspicion, perhaps, or jealousy. "James has been a good friend," I said carefully. "Helped me with the yard. Funny," Sarah continued. "I don't remember William mentioning you two were back in touch." James smiled easily. "Old friendships have a way of resurfacing when needed." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. And you just happened to show up right when Frank needed help with the yard? Something like that, James replied, not elaborating. I sensed tension building but couldn't understand its source. William shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Thomas and Amber exchanged glances. It's quite a coincidence, Sarah pressed, almost like someone arranged it. What are you getting at, Sarah? I asked, feeling defensive without knowing why. Nothing, she said, but her tone said otherwise. It's just interesting timing. William cleared his throat. The yard really does look great, Dad. Martha would have loved it. The mention of Martha's name hung in the air. Everyone at the table had loved her, in their own ways. Her absence still felt like a physical thing sometimes. Speaking of Martha, Sarah said suddenly, I was going through some old photos last week. Found something interesting. She reached for her purse, pulling out a faded Polaroid. I recognized it immediately. Martha and me at the lake house, summer of '91. James stood beside us, arm slung over my shoulder. We were all laughing at something forgotten now. Funny thing is, Sarah continued, sliding the photo across the table, I found several of these. James seems to have been around quite a lot back then. I didn't understand her point. Of course he was, we were friends. Then you had that big falling out, she said, watching me carefully. The one neither of you would talk about. James's smile had faded. Ancient history. Is it? Sarah pressed. Because Martha mentioned it once, right before she got sick, said it was the biggest regret of her life that you two stopped speaking. Sarah, William warned, glancing at the children who were starting to notice the tension. No, I'm curious, she continued, eyes fixed on James. What was so terrible that you didn't speak for 30 years, and why show up now right when Frank needs someone in his corner? The implication hung unspoken. James had ulterior motives. He wanted something from me. That's enough, I said firmly. Whatever happened between James and me is our business. Sarah sat back, a small satisfied smile playing at her lips. Of course, I just find the timing convenient. After dinner, William helped me with the dishes while Sarah took the children outside to see the yard. James excused himself to make a phone call. We worked in silence for several minutes, the familiar routine of passing plates requiring no conversation. Dad, William finally said, voice low, I'm sorry about Sarah, she can be. Suspicious, I offered. He sighed. Protective in her way. I set down the dish towel. Is that what you call it? William looked uncomfortable. She means well. She was worried about you, living alone, letting things go. So worried she banned my grandchildren from visiting. His expression tightened. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, William. I kept my voice even, but firm. She gave me an ultimatum about my own yard, in my own house. The kids were asking questions about why everything looked so different from when Grandma was alive. Sarah thought. I know what Sarah thought, I interrupted, that I was falling apart, that I couldn't be trusted around children because I didn't mow the lawn on her schedule. William wouldn't meet my eyes. We were concerned, that's all. Concerned. Enough to stop visiting, but not concerned enough to offer help. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but they'd been building for months. That's not fair, isn't it? 5 years, William. 5 years I've been alone in this house. How often did you offer to help with maintenance? How many times did Sarah suggest bringing the kids over to rake leaves or plant flowers? He had no answer for that. And now James shows up and suddenly I'm supposed to be suspicious of his motives. Nobody's saying that. Sarah is. Pretty clearly. William dried his hands slowly. It just seems strange, him appearing out of nowhere after so long. A thought struck me, ugly but persistent. Are you worried he's after my money, the house? Dad, no, of course not. Because there's not much to take, I continued. Social Security, the house, maybe 10,000 in savings. That's not it, William insisted, but something in his expression shifted. You know, I said slowly, your mother left the house to both of us. Joint ownership. I always figured you'd get it when I'm gone anyway. William looked stricken. I don't care about the house. Don't you? I studied my son's face, seeing echoes of the boy he'd been, but also the man he'd become. Someone I didn't fully know anymore. Before he could answer, Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face tight with forced pleasantry. "The children are getting tired," she announced. "We should probably head home soon." As they gathered their things, I watched the careful way Sarah directed everyone, collecting jackets, herding children, orchestrating their departure with military precision. She barely looked at me, but I caught her watching James with naked suspicion. Thomas and Amber hung back, promising to return next weekend to help with more yard work. I was grateful for their genuine warmth amid the strained farewells. When they'd all gone, James and I sat on the porch steps, watching darkness settle over the newly restored yard. "Well," he said finally, "that was interesting." "Sarah doesn't trust you," I said bluntly. He laughed without humor. "Sarah doesn't trust anyone who might influence you outside her control." The comment hit something that had been nagging at me all day. "What's that supposed to mean?" James looked surprised. "Come on, Frank, you must see it. She's been isolating you for years." "That's ridiculous, is it? When did your visits with the grandkids start becoming less frequent? When did William's calls get shorter, more formal?" I thought back, trying to place a timeline on the growing distance. After Martha died. But that's natural. People get busy. Or Sarah got more control, James suggested. "Think about it, Frank. Martha was the connector. She kept everyone close, made the plans, created reasons for family to gather. With her gone, Sarah stepped in," I finished slowly, remembering how quickly she'd taken charge of holiday arrangements, how often she'd been the one to cancel visits at the last minute. "And suddenly you're on the outside looking in," James continued, "dependent on their approval for access to your own family." The idea felt both outlandish and frighteningly plausible. Had I been manipulated so easily, cut off from my own grandchildren through a campaign so subtle I hadn't recognized it? "That's a serious accusation," I said, not quite ready to accept it. "Look at the evidence, Frank. The ultimatum about the yard wasn't about safety or property values. It was about control, making you dance to her tune." I remembered Sarah's face when she'd arrived today, the surprise when she saw the yard transformed, the barely concealed disappointment that her ultimatum had been met. There had been no joy in her expression, no relief that her supposed concerns had been addressed. Why would she do that? I asked, though possibilities were already forming in my mind. James shrugged. "Could be many reasons. Some people just need to control everything around them. Or maybe what?" I prompted when he hesitated. "Maybe there's something else, something about your relationship with William that threatens her." "Like what?" "I don't know, Frank, but I saw her face when you and William were talking in the kitchen. She didn't like it." "Not one bit." I stood abruptly, uncomfortable with the direction of our conversation. "I think you're reading too much into things." "Maybe," James conceded, but he didn't sound convinced. "Just be careful, that's all I'm saying." That night after James left, I found myself staring at old photo albums. Pictures of William growing up, Martha at his college graduation, beaming with pride. The early days with Sarah, when she'd seemed so perfect for him. Ambitious, organized, the counterbalance to his easygoing nature. When had things changed? When had Sarah's efficiency become control? When had her concern become interference? I flipped to later photos after the grandchildren were born. Found fewer images than there should have been. Realized with a jolt that most family gatherings in recent years had taken place at their house, not mine. Always with the excuse that it was easier with the children. Easier to control the narrative, perhaps. Sleep came fitfully that night. Dreams filled with half-remembered conversations and Sarah's scrutinizing gaze. Monday morning brought Thomas and Amber back, as promised. They arrived early, carrying coffee and bagels. "Thought you might need breakfast," Thomas explained, setting the paper bag on my kitchen table. "And we have more plants in the car." Their enthusiasm was infectious. We spent the morning adding foxglove to the shadier corners of the yard, just as Martha's journal had suggested. "So," Thomas said casually as we worked, "what did you think of yesterday?" I considered how to answer. "It was good to see everyone," he snorted softly. "That's diplomatic. Your mother seemed concerned about James," I offered. Thomas and Amber exchanged glances. "Mom's been weird lately," he admitted. "Ever since you started fixing up the yard. Like she's angry about it." "Angry? Why would she be angry?" Thomas shrugged. "No idea. But she and Dad had a pretty big fight after James first showed up here. I overheard them, my hands stilled in the dirt." "What were they fighting about?" "You, mostly. Mom kept saying James was taking advantage, that he must want something. Dad said she was being paranoid, that you needed friends your own age. And Mom said something like, we can't afford to let him get too independent now. Dad got really quiet after that. The words landed like a physical blow. We can't afford to let him get too independent now. What did that mean? Thomas, I said carefully, do you know if your parents have been having money troubles? His expression clouded. Why do you ask? Just curious. Dad's firm isn't doing great, he admitted reluctantly. There was talk about layoffs a few months ago, and Mom's been looking at real estate listings lately. Bigger houses, expensive neighborhoods. Something cold settled in my stomach. James's warnings echoed in my mind. Sarah's sudden interest in my social connections. The ultimatum about the yard. Delivered just as I was starting to assert independence, Grandpa. Thomas was watching me, concern in his young face. Is everything okay? I forced a smile. Fine, just thinking about what to plant next. That night I called William directly. Something I rarely did anymore, Dad. He sounded surprised. Everything all right? Just checking in, I said casually. I've been thinking, maybe I should update my will. Get things in order. There was a pause, longer than natural. Any particular reason? Just being practical. I'm not getting any younger. I suppose that makes sense. His voice was careful now. Do you need recommendations for an attorney? I thought I'd talk to James about it. He mentioned knowing someone. Another pause. James isn't a lawyer. No, but he knows people. Been helpful that way. Dad, William's voice dropped. Are you sure about James? About trusting him with something like this? Why wouldn't I trust my oldest friend? It's just, after 30 years of no contact, he suddenly reappears when you're alone and vulnerable. Don't you find that suspicious? Vulnerable, I repeated, my grip tightening on the phone. Is that how you see me, William? That's not what I meant. I think it is. I think you and Sarah have decided I can't take care of myself anymore. Dad, please, we're concerned, that's all. Concerned about what? I pushed. My yard's clean now. The house is in order. What exactly are you worried about? He sighed heavily. It's not that simple. Make it simple. Sarah thinks... He hesitated. Sarah thinks maybe you should consider moving somewhere with more support. As you get older, there it was. The real agenda behind the yard ultimatum, behind Sarah's suspicion of James. They wanted me out of my house. Out of Martha's house, moving where exactly? I asked, though I already knew. There's a nice retirement community near us, William said too quickly, like he'd rehearsed this. Or we have that finished basement. It would be convenient for everyone. Convenient, I echoed. For everyone. Dad, don't be like that. Like what, William? Upset that my son and his wife have been plotting to get me out of my home? Nobody's plotting anything. We care about you. Strange way of showing it. This is exactly why Sarah wanted to wait to bring this up. You're not being rational, I laughed, a harsh sound. Not being rational? You cut me off from my grandchildren as leverage. You send Sarah to deliver ultimatums. You create problems that don't exist, so you can swoop in with solutions that benefit you. That's not fair. No. What's not fair is whatever game you two are playing. I was angrier than I'd been in years, decades maybe. Tell Sarah her plan didn't work. I'm staying in my house. And I'll be calling a lawyer tomorrow, but not about moving. Dad, I hung up, hands shaking. For several minutes I just sat there, heart racing, trying to process what I'd learned. Thomas's overheard conversation. Sarah's suspicion of James. William's too ready suggestion of moving. They'd been planning this. For how long? Since Martha died before? The phone rang again almost immediately. I let it go to voicemail. Then again. And again. Finally I picked up on the fourth call. Frank? Frank, are you there? Sarah's voice sharp with urgency. I'm here, I said coldly. William just told me about your conversation. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Has there? We're not trying to take your house, Frank. That's ridiculous. Is it? Then why the sudden concern about my living situation? Why the campaign to isolate me from my grandchildren? Why the paranoia about James? Campaign to... Frank, you're not making sense. Her voice had that patronizing tone she used with the children when they were being unreasonable. We've been worried about you since Martha died. You've been depressed, neglecting your home, your health. We want what's best for you. And what's best for me just happens to be giving up my home. The home I built with Martha. The home where we raised William? Nobody's asking you to give up anything, she insisted. We're talking about a transition, a way to make your golden years easier. My golden years are none of your concern, I snapped. And don't pretend this is about my welfare. Thomas told me about your financial troubles, about the house hunting. There was a beat of silence. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was ice. Thomas needs to mind his own business, and so do you. My house is my business. My life is my business. Fine, she said tightly. Have it your way, but don't come crying to us when that supposed friend of yours shows his true colors. Is that a threat? It's a warning, Frank. You can't trust James. Funny, I said. He says the same about you. I hung up again, heart hammering in my chest. The confrontation had been building for years, I realized. Every silent criticism, every cancelled visit, every look of disapproval at my housekeeping, my yard, my choices. The phone rang again, but I didn't answer. Instead, I called James. They want my house, I said when he picked up. That's what this has all been about. James was silent for a moment. Tell me exactly what happened. I recounted both conversations, the pieces falling into place as I spoke. William's firm struggling financially. Sarah's ambitions for a bigger house. Their sudden concern about my living situation. I'm sorry, Frank, James said when I finished. I suspected something was off, but I didn't want to plant ideas. What do I do now? You protect yourself, he said simply. Starting tomorrow, we get your affairs in order. Make sure your house and assets are secure. William's name is on the deed, I admitted. Martha wanted to make sure he was taken care of if something happened to me. Then we need to move quickly. The next morning, I felt sick to my stomach, betrayed in a way I hadn't imagined possible. My own son, plotting with his wife to pressure me out of my home, using my grandchildren as pawns, creating an ultimatum about the yard to establish a pattern of neglect they could point to later. I was making coffee when the doorbell rang. Early for visitors, I opened it to find Sarah standing there alone, eyes red-rimmed from crying or lack of sleep. We need to talk, she said, pushing past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. Where's William? I asked, following her into my living room. At home with the children. She turned to face me. I didn't tell him I was coming. Something about her demeanor made me uneasy. Sarah was always composed, always in control. This version, disheveled, emotional, was unfamiliar territory. What do you want, Sarah? I want you to listen, she said, sinking onto my couch. Really listen. Before you do something we'll all regret. Like what? Secure my own home against my family's schemes? Her laugh was hollow. Is that what you think? That we're scheming against you? The evidence suggests it. She shook her head slowly. The evidence suggests nothing of the sort. But your friend James has twisted everything, hasn't he? James has been honest with me. More than I can say for you and William. Sarah leaned forward, her expression intense. Frank, do you know why James really disappeared from your life 30 years ago? Did he tell you that part? I hesitated. He said it was a stupid argument. That neither of us remembered the details. Well, I know the details. Martha told me years ago. Martha wouldn't. She did, Sarah interrupted. Because she was worried about you. Because she needed someone to understand what had happened in case he ever came back. A cold feeling spread through me. What are you talking about? Sarah's eyes never left mine. James didn't leave because of an argument, Frank. He left because Martha caught him forging your signature on loan documents. He was trying to steal from you. The accusation hung in the air between us, heavy as a storm cloud. James forging Martha's signature. It didn't make sense. That's ridiculous, I said finally. Martha would have told me. Sarah shook her head. She wanted to. But you two had been friends since childhood. She knew how much that would hurt you. I don't believe you. Look at the timing, Frank. 30 years ago, right when you got that big promotion at Carlson Manufacturing, suddenly making real money for the first time. And James just happens to try accessing your finances, then disappears when he's caught. My mind raced back, trying to align memories with Sarah's version of events. It was true. The falling out had coincided with my promotion to shift supervisor. My salary had nearly doubled. Martha never said a word, I insisted. Not in 30 years of marriage. Because she loved you too much to break your heart, Sarah said quietly. She told me the whole story right after my wedding to William. Said I needed to understand the burden of protecting someone you love from painful truths. Why would she tell you and not me? Sarah's expression softened slightly. Because she was sick by then, Frank. She knew she was dying. Wanted someone else to know in case James ever came back. The timeline matched. Martha had been diagnosed just after William and Sarah's wedding. We'd had 6 months between diagnosis and the end. If what you're saying is true, I said slowly, why would James come back now? What's he after? Your house, Sarah said simply. What else? You're alone, vulnerable. The house is half in William's name, but that's an obstacle James could work around with time. By turning me against my own family, I finished, the pieces suddenly rearranging themselves in my mind. Sarah nodded. Exactly. First he helps with the yard, makes himself indispensable. Then he starts planting seeds of doubt about our intentions. Before long you're changing your will, cutting us out completely. It sounded plausible. Too plausible, but something still didn't add up. How did James know about the yard ultimatum? I asked. How did he know when to show up at my door with exactly the right story? Sarah hesitated, just long enough for me to catch it. I don't know. Maybe he'd been watching the house, waiting for the right moment. Or maybe someone told him, I suggested, watching her face carefully. Someone who wanted me to clean up the yard but didn't want to help directly. Her eyes widened slightly. What are you implying? I'm not sure yet, I admitted, but I intend to find out. After Sarah left, I sat alone in my living room, trying to make sense of competing narratives. James, my oldest friend, possibly a con man waiting 30 years to strike. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, either genuinely concerned for my welfare or orchestrating an elaborate scheme to get my house. Both scenarios seemed far-fetched. Both had elements that rang true. I needed facts, not accusations. Picking up the phone, I called the one person who might have an objective perspective. Thomas? Ed's grandpa Frank. I need a favor. The next morning found me in the public library, seated at a computer terminal with Thomas beside me. The green-haired girl Amber stood watch nearby, making sure no one approached while we worked. I don't know what we're looking for exactly, I admitted as Thomas navigated the county records database. But something about this whole situation feels wrong. Mum's always been weird about money, Thomas offered, fingers flying across the keyboard. Dad doesn't like to talk about it, but I know they argue about finances a lot. How bad is it at William's firm? I asked. Thomas glanced up. Pretty bad. 3 partners left last month. Dad's department might be cut completely. That aligned with Sarah's urgency about my living situation. If William lost his job, they'd be in serious trouble. What about James? I asked. Can you find anything on him? Thomas nodded, opening a new search window. Full name? James Edward Miller, born April 1957. The search results populated quickly. Property records, marriage license, divorce decree from 12 years ago. Nothing suspicious. He owns a small house on Elm Street, Thomas noted. Purchased 5 years ago. Mortgage is current, 5 years. Right after Martha died. He really had moved back to town when I needed him most. What about 30 years ago? I asked. Any court records or arrests? Thomas refined the search, scrolling through older documents. Nothing criminal. There's a civil case from 1993, Miller versus First National Bank. Can you open that file? Thomas clicked through several screens before finding the case summary. Looks like James sued the bank for wrongful termination. Claimed he was fired without cause, was he? According to this, the case was settled out of court. No details on the settlement terms. A bank job. I hadn't known James worked at a bank back then. Another piece that didn't quite fit. Let's try something else, I suggested. Can you look up my property records? See who's listed on the deed. Thomas pulled up the information. It shows you and William as joint owners. Deed was transferred to both names in 2018. 2018? I frowned. That can't be right. Martha and I put William's name on the deed back in the 90s, when he graduated college. It says right here, deed transfer recorded March 15, 2018. Prior to that, sole owner Frank Miller, 3 years ago, after Martha died. I had no memory of signing such documents. Can you print that page? Thomas clicked the print icon, then lowered his voice. Grandpa, something weird is going on. Mom told me you were getting confused about financial matters. Said we shouldn't trust what you remember about legal documents. The implication chilled me. Sarah was setting up a narrative of cognitive decline, preparing to challenge my competency if needed. I'm not confused, Thomas. I'm being manipulated. The question is, by whom? Armed with printed records, I drove to the bank where I'd done business for 40 years. Gloria at the main desk had known Martha and me since we opened our first joint account. Frank Miller, she greeted me warmly. How are you doing? Yard's looking good these days. I managed to smile. Thanks, Gloria. I need to check some records. Specifically, any changes to accounts or power of attorney documents in the last 5 years. Her expression grew serious. Let me pull those up for you. ID, please. I handed over my driver's license, watching as she typed information into her computer. Her brow furrowed slightly. That's odd, she murmured. There was a change to your accounts 3 years ago. Power of attorney was granted to William Miller. I never signed that, I said firmly. Gloria looked uncomfortable. The signature matches our records, Frank, and it was witnessed by a bank employee. Who witnessed it? She checked the screen again. Sarah Johnson. She was working here part-time back then. Another piece clicked into place. Sarah had worked at the bank briefly after William's firm started struggling. She'd claimed it was to keep busy while the kids were in school. Gloria, I need copies of those documents. And I need to speak with the bank manager. An hour later, I left the bank with a folder full of papers and a growing sense of betrayal. Not just the power of attorney, but account access changes. A home equity line of credit application in both William's name and mine. All with signatures that looked like mine, but that I had no memory of signing. I drove to James's house next, the address from the property records clear in my mind. His truck sat in the driveway of a modest bungalow, flower beds neat but not elaborate. Nothing about it suggested a man planning to con his way into a bigger property. He opened the door before I could knock, surprise evident on his face. Frank, is everything okay? I held up the folder. We need to talk. Seated at his kitchen table, I laid out everything I'd discovered. The changed deed, the power of attorney, Sarah's connection to the bank. I think they've been setting me up for years, I concluded, creating a paper trail that makes it look like I'm declining mentally. That way, when they push me out of my home, it seems like a natural progression rather than a takeover. James studied the documents without speaking, his expression grave. Sarah came to see me this morning, I continued. Told me you tried to steal from Martha and me 30 years ago. Said that's why you disappeared. His head snapped up. She what? Said Martha caught you forging my signature on loan documents. James stared at me, shock evident in his features. Frank, that's not just a lie. It's a complete reversal of the truth. What do you mean? He stood abruptly, disappearing into another room. When he returned, he carried a small fireproof box. I hoped I'd never need these, he said, unlocking it with a key from his pocket. But Martha made me promise to keep them, just in case. Inside were papers, old papers, yellowed with age. He handed them to me carefully. In 1993, I was working at First National as a loan officer. William came to me for a loan, said he needed money for graduate school. But the paperwork seemed off. When I checked more closely, I realized he'd forged your signature as a co-signer. I stared at the loan application in disbelief, my signature at the bottom clearly not in my handwriting. I confronted him, James continued. Told him I couldn't process the loan with a forged signature. He got angry, threatened to tell the bank I'd been helping clients bypass credit checks. A complete lie. When I wouldn't budge, he went to my supervisor with the accusation. You were fired, I said, remembering the wrongful termination suit. James nodded. The bank investigated, eventually cleared me, but by then the damage was done. William had told you and Martha I'd tried to steal from you. Martha figured out the truth later, found evidence of what William had done. She confronted him privately. Why didn't she tell me? For the same reason Sarah gave. She couldn't bear to break your heart. William was your only child. She made him promise to never do anything like that again. And she made me promise to stay away to keep the peace. It fit. Martha's protectiveness, her willingness to shield me from painful truths. William's sudden coldness toward James, his inexplicable ability to pay for graduate school despite our modest contributions. So Sarah's story is William's original lie, repurposed, James finished. They're using a 30-year-old deception to discredit me now that I'm back in your life. I sat back, overwhelmed by the layers of betrayal. Not just recent manipulation, but decades of lies. Why come back now? I asked. After all this time? James's expression softened. Martha's last request. She called me from the hospital, made me promise to check on you after she was gone. Said to give you time to grieve, then make sure you weren't alone. 5 years is a long time. It took me that long to work up the courage, he admitted. I drove by your house every week, but could never bring myself to knock. Then I saw Sarah visiting one day, looking at the property like she was measuring it. Something about her expression set off alarm bells. The final pieces were falling into place. So when Thomas mentioned the yard ultimatum, I knew they were making their move, James nodded. Creating a pretext to declare you unable to care for yourself. I stood, gathering the documents. I need to confront them. Frank, wait. Think this through. If you confront them directly, they'll deny everything. William has legal access to your accounts. Sarah has been setting up a paper trail suggesting cognitive decline. You need leverage, he was right. I needed more than accusations. I needed irrefutable evidence. What do you suggest? The plan came together over the next 2 days. Careful, methodical steps to reclaim control of my life. First, a visit to a lawyer James recommended, someone with no connections to William's firm. New will, new power of attorney documents, removal of William's name from my financial accounts. Next, a forensic accountant to trace where money had gone in the past 3 years. The results were sobering. Over $30,000 withdrawn from my accounts for household expenses that didn't align with my actual spending. Finally, the most difficult step, gathering everyone together for a Sunday dinner. Another family meal, this time with very different intentions. They arrived punctually again, Sarah orchestrating their entrance with the same military precision. This time her smile seemed strained, her eyes constantly darting to James, who stood beside me in the doorway. Welcome, I said, gesturing them inside. Everyone's here already, Sarah faltered slightly. Everyone? Thomas and Amber are in the kitchen, and I've invited a few others to join us. In the living room, Gloria from the bank sat with a man in a suit, Roger Hayes, the bank manager. Beside them, my new attorney, Patricia Lawson, reviewed documents from a leather portfolio. What is this? William asked, his voice tight with confusion. Family meeting, I replied calmly. About the future of this house and my role in it. Sarah's composure slipped further. Frank, if this is about our conversation the other day, it's about much more than that, I interrupted. Please sit down. All of you. The children were sent outside with Amber to play in the newly restored yard. Thomas remained, taking a seat beside James with a grim expression. The adults arranged themselves awkwardly on couches and chairs, tension radiating through the room. I'm going to keep this simple, I began, standing to face them all. For the past 3 years, someone has been systematically preparing to take control of my assets, changing deeds, establishing power of attorney, creating a narrative of mental decline. William's face paled. Sarah's hand clutched her purse with white knuckles. Mr. Hayes from First National has confirmed that documents were executed without my knowledge or consent. Ms. Lawson, my attorney, has filed the necessary paperwork to invalidate those changes. Dad, William started, there's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, I cut him off. The signatures on these documents are forgeries. Expertly done, but forgeries nonetheless. That's ridiculous, Sarah interjected. You're confused, Frank. You signed those papers. I was there. That's the problem, Sarah. You were there as a bank employee, witnessing signatures on documents I never saw. I turned to Mr. Hayes. The bank has reviewed the security footage from those dates. Would you like to share what was found? The bank manager cleared his throat. Our records show Mrs. Miller entering the bank alone on those dates, conducting business with multiple documents already signed. That doesn't prove anything, Sarah protested. But her voice had lost its confidence. I looked directly at my son. William, did you know about the forged documents, the withdrawn money? His eyes couldn't meet mine. Dad, we were trying to help. You weren't taking care of yourself. The house was falling apart. So you decided to take matters into your own hands, I finished for him. Just like you did 30 years ago with that loan application. His head snapped up, shock written across his features. James shifted uncomfortably beside me. Yes, I know about that too, I continued. The pattern's the same, isn't it? Financial pressure, desperation, the easy solution of using my resources without my knowledge. I was young then, William whispered. Made a mistake. And now? Sarah stood abruptly. This is absurd. We've done nothing wrong. We've been trying to help you, Frank. Everything we've done has been for your own good, including the yard ultimatum. Keeping my grandchildren away unless I complied with your demands? The yard was a health hazard, she insisted. We were concerned about the children's safety. No, Sarah, you were establishing a pattern of neglect, creating evidence that I couldn't care for myself or my property. The first step toward moving me out. The silence that followed confirmed my accusations more than any admission could have. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, nodding to Ms. Lawson. "My attorney has prepared new documents returning full control of all assets to me. William's name has been removed from the deed. The power of attorney has been revoked." "You can't do that," Sarah protested. "The house is half William's." "Actually," Ms. Lawson interjected, "the transfer of deed in 2018 was fraudulent. The original arrangement Mrs. Miller established remains in effect. The house passes to William upon Mr. Miller's death, not before." William looked devastated. "Sarah, furious. "Dad," he began, "we never meant to get caught," I finished for him. "I know." The confrontation continued for another hour. Denials, then half admissions, then finally broken confessions. William's firm was failing. Sarah had orchestrated everything, convincing him it was for my own good. They'd planned to move me to a retirement community, sell my house, use the proceeds to buy something bigger for themselves. "We would have taken care of you," Sarah insisted repeatedly. "You would have had everything you needed." "Except my dignity," I replied. "Except my home. Except the truth. By the time they left, something fundamental had changed between us. Not broken beyond repair, perhaps, but severely damaged." William looked shell-shocked, like he couldn't reconcile his self-image as a good son with his actions. Sarah remained defiant to the end, insisting they'd only wanted what was best for me. I stood on the porch as they loaded the children into the car, Ellie waving happily, unaware of the family earthquake that had just occurred. I waved back, my heart aching for the innocents caught in this web of adult deception. Thomas stayed behind, unable to go home with his mother and stepfather just yet. James offered him the couch for a few days. "I knew something was wrong," Thomas said as we sat on the porch after everyone left. "But I never imagined—" "Family can surprise you," I said quietly. "For better or worse." "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we rebuild, differently this time." The following weeks brought significant changes. William came alone to apologize properly, a stilted, painful conversation where he finally admitted the full extent of his financial troubles and his role in Sarah's schemes. She filed for divorce a month later, unable to accept the collapse of her carefully constructed plans. The children still visited, though under different arrangements. Thomas moved out of their house entirely, taking an apartment near the college where he was studying. Amber became a regular fixture in Martha's garden, bringing it back to full glory with her expert knowledge. James and I settled into the comfortable friendship we'd had decades ago, before William's deception drove us apart. We fished on Saturdays, played cards on Wednesday nights, talked about Martha and the years we'd missed. One evening in late autumn, with the maple tree blazing red against the darkening sky, I sat on the porch with James, watching the neighborhood children play in piles of leaves. "Do you think Martha would be proud?" I asked suddenly. "Of how things turned out?" James considered the question. "She'd be heartbroken about William, but proud of you for standing up for yourself. I keep thinking I should have seen it earlier. The signs were there." "We see what we expect to see," James said simply. "You expected family to treat you with love and respect." "That's not a character flaw, Frank." I nodded, watching a young father help his daughter build a leaf pile across the street. "You know what I've learned from all this?" "What's that?" "Trust isn't just given because of blood relations. It's earned through actions over time." I looked at the yard, now vibrant with Martha's favorite autumn flowers. "And sometimes the family you choose is more reliable than the family you're born with." James smiled, understanding the reference to our renewed friendship. "Martha always said you were the wisest man she knew. Just took you a while to see it yourself." The maple leaves continued to fall, covering the ground in a blanket of red and gold. Martha's roses had gone dormant for the winter, but would return in spring just as she'd promised. The yard looked alive again, tended and cared for. A reflection of the man I'd become in these difficult months, no longer neglected, no longer willing to be manipulated. "If you want to visit," I said, echoing Sarah's ultimatum with a smile. "You'll clean the yard." James laughed. "Already did. But someone knocked first." "Best knock I ever answered," I admitted. We sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell completely. Two old men who had weathered betrayal and found something valuable on the other side. Truth, and the peace that comes with it. Life doesn't give us what we expect, but sometimes it gives us exactly what we need. The courage to stand up for ourselves, and the wisdom to recognize genuine love when we find it. The rest is just noise. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and rate this story from 0 to 10 in the comments. Your support means everything.